Close your eyes and imagine the sky over Germany in 1944, where the air itself has become a killing field, where American bomber formations fly at 25,000 feet, surrounded by escort fighters that have transformed the Luftwaffe's home territory into contested airspace, where German pilots who once dominated European skies now find themselves outnumbered and outmatched, where survival is measured in missions completed rather than victories achieved. The aircraft they fear most is not the nimble Mustang or the high-altitude Lightning, but something that seems to defy every principle of fighter design, something that looks wrong, that appears too heavy and too blunt to be effective in aerial combat, that German pilots mockingly called the Jug, short for juggernaut, the unstoppable force that crushes everything in its path. Your name is Hans Hartmann. You are 22 years old, a Luftwaffe fighter pilot flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s from bases in Bavaria, scrambling daily to intercept the American bomber streams that are systematically destroying German industrial capacity, that are turning cities into rubble and forcing the Reich into underground production facilities and desperate measures that cannot compensate for the overwhelming material superiority the Allies have achieved. You have 17 confirmed kills, enough to make you experienced by 1944 standards, when pilot life expectancy is measured in weeks, when the replacement pilots arriving at your squadron have perhaps 20 hours of flight training compared to the 200 hours that was standard earlier in the war, when fuel shortages mean you fly fewer practice missions and every combat sortie risks encountering enemies who have more experience, better training, superior numbers. You see them approaching from the west, not the bombers, which are still distant, their contrails marking their position at altitude, but the escort fighters that fly ahead and beside and behind the formations, protecting them from the German interceptors that used to be able to attack bomber formations with relative impunity before the Americans developed long-range fighters capable of accompanying the bombers all the way to target and back. Most of the escorts are P-51 Mustangs, sleek and fast and dangerous, or P-38 Lightnings with their distinctive twin-boom design. But mixed among them are aircraft that look different, that appear blocky and utilitarian, that seem impossibly large for single-seat fighters, that radiate a kind of brutal functionality rather than aerodynamic elegance. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, the Jug. You have encountered them before, have learned through experience and the reports of squadron mates who survived engagements that these aircraft are dangerous in ways that transcend their awkward appearance, that the American pilots flying them have developed tactics that exploit the Thunderbolt's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses, that attacking them requires caution and respect because they are nearly impossible to shoot down and absolutely lethal if they get guns on you. The P-47 is enormous for a fighter, weighs 7 tons fully loaded, more than twice the weight of your Bf-109, powered by a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine that produces over 2,000 horsepower, that drives a 13-foot propeller, that gives the aircraft performance characteristics that seem contradictory. It is fast in level flight, and especially in dives, where it can exceed 500 miles per hour, faster than almost any German fighter can safely fly. But it is also sluggish in turns, cannot match the Bf-109's maneuverability at low speeds, appears vulnerable in the kind of turning dogfight that German pilots train for. But the appearance is deceptive. The Thunderbolt's size and weight make it a stable gun platform, allow it to absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter fighters, create psychological advantage because German pilots who score hits often assume they have killed the enemy, only to watch the P-47 continue flying, continue fighting, continue pursuing with the relentless determination that earned it the Juggernaut nickname. The aircraft is built around its engine, with armor plating protecting the pilot and critical systems, with redundant controls and self-sealing fuel tanks, and structural strength that allows it to survive collisions and combat damage and emergency landings that would tear apart aircraft designed with different priorities. Your squadron leader briefs the intercept. Concentrate on the bombers. Ignore the escorts unless they engage you directly. The Thunderbolts are too heavily armed and too well armored to be efficient targets. If you get into turning fight with them, break off and dive. They cannot follow you into tight turns, but they will catch you in a dive. So extend the dive until you are out of their range and then climb back to altitude for another pass at the bombers. The tactics are defensive, reactive, designed to minimize casualties rather than maximize kills, reflecting the reality that the Luftwaffe in 1944 is fighting for survival rather than air superiority, is trying to protect German cities and industry rather than dominate the skies. You climb to intercept altitude, your Bf-109 responsive and nimble, optimized for the kind of combat that was standard earlier in the war, when German fighters could choose their engagements, could attack and withdraw at will, could exploit superior tactics and training against numerically superior but less experienced opponents. But that era is over. The Americans have learned. Their pilots are veterans now, have survived months of combat, have developed doctrine that turns their material advantages into tactical superiority, have numbers that allow them to overwhelm German defenders through sheer presence, even when individual German pilots are more skilled.
The Thunderbolts peel off from the bomber formation, diving toward your squadron with the speed that only their weight and power can generate. You watch them come, their massive radial engines clearly visible, their wings thick and stubby compared to the elegant proportions of European fighters, their overall design suggesting brutality rather than finesse. They look like flying tanks, like aerial battering rams, like something designed by engineers who prioritize survivability over aesthetics, function over form. And they are terrifying precisely because of that design philosophy, because engaging them means accepting that your advantages in maneuverability matter less than their advantages in firepower and durability, that the combat will be decided not by skill alone, but by the simple mathematics of how much damage each aircraft can absorb and deliver. The Thunderbolt in front of you opens fire. 8 50-caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, all firing simultaneously, creating a stream of bullets that fills the airspace between you with lethal metal. The bullet stream from the Thunderbolt's 8 machine guns is unlike anything you encountered earlier in the war, is fundamentally different from the armament on British fighters that typically carried smaller caliber weapons, is devastating in ways that transform aerial combat from test of skill and nerve into simple question of who can deliver more destructive power to target first. The 50-caliber rounds are massive, carry enormous kinetic energy, punch through aluminum skin and structural members with ease, can destroy engines and fuel tanks and control systems with single hits, can kill pilots through armor that stops smaller rounds, can tear wings off aircraft with sustained fire. You brake hard left,
pulling the Bf-109 into evasive turn that generates G-forces pressing you into the seat, graying your vision at the edges, testing the aircraft's structural limits and your own physical tolerance. The Thunderbolt cannot follow into the turn. Its weight and wing loading make tight maneuvering impossible at this speed, make it relatively helpless in the kind of turning fight that European fighters excel at. But the American pilot does not try to follow. He does not need to. He has altitude advantage, has energy advantage from the dive, has the patience to wait for you to complete your evasive maneuver and return to level flight where he can re-engage with his superior speed and firepower. This is the tactical evolution that makes the Thunderbolt so effective despite its apparent limitations. Early in their deployment, American pilots tried to dogfight with German fighters, tried to outturn the Bf-109s and FW-190s, tried to use tactics that played to German strengths and Thunderbolt weaknesses. They died in significant numbers, but the survivors learned, adapted, developed doctrine that exploited the P-47's advantages, its speed in level flight and dives, its ability to absorb damage, its devastating firepower, its range that allowed it to escort bombers deep into Germany and still have fuel to engage in extended combat. The new tactics are simple but effective. Thunderbolt pilots maintain altitude and speed, refuse to engage in slow-speed turning fights, attack in diving passes that use their weight and power to build velocity German fighters cannot match, fire their 850 caliber guns in short bursts that conserve ammunition while delivering lethal damage, break off attacks by diving further rather than turning, extend until they are out of range, and then climb back to altitude for another pass. The cycle repeats, each attack delivering punishment while minimizing exposure, each pass demonstrating that the Thunderbolt is not trying to outmaneuver German fighters, but simply to destroy them through superior firepower and tactical discipline. You attempt to pursue the Thunderbolt that just attacked you, pushing your Bf-109 into a dive to maintain contact, to position for a shot while the American pilot is pulling out of his attack run. But he is already accelerating away, his massive engine delivering power that your lighter aircraft cannot match in straight-line speed, his dive taking him out of your effective range before you can bring guns to bear. You watch him extend the distance, watch him begin a climbing turn that will position him for another attack, watch him demonstrate the tactical patience that characterizes American fighter operations in 1944. They do not need to win individual dogfights, do not need to prove pilot skill in turning contests, simply need to destroy German fighters efficiently while protecting the bombers that are their primary mission. Around you, the engagement is chaos. Bf-109s and FW-190s are mixing with Thunderbolts and Mustangs in the confused melee that develops when formations dissolve into individual combats, when tactical discipline breaks down and combat becomes series of one-on-one encounters decided by skill and luck and the specific advantages each aircraft brings to the fight. You see a squadron mate score hits on a Thunderbolt. Watch the tracers strike the engine cowling and fuselage. Watch for the smoke or fire or structural failure that should indicate a kill. But the Thunderbolt continues flying, continues maneuvering, its armored engine and self-sealing tanks absorbing damage that would have destroyed a German fighter, its structural integrity maintained despite hits that punched through metal and severed systems.
The American pilot in the damaged Thunderbolt does not attempt to flee or disengage. He continues fighting, uses his remaining maneuverability to position for attack on another German fighter, demonstrates the confidence that comes from flying aircraft designed to survive rather than to avoid damage, designed to bring pilots home even when combat has torn pieces from the airframe and damaged critical systems. This survivability creates psychological advantage that transcends tactical calculation. German pilots learn through repeated encounters that damaging a Thunderbolt does not necessarily mean destroying it, that scoring hits is not the same as achieving kills, that the aircraft they are fighting can absorb punishment that would be lethal to their own fighters. You attempt another attack, positioning above and behind a Thunderbolt that is climbing after a diving attack on the bomber formation. This should be ideal position, altitude advantage, attacking from the blind spot behind and above, opportunity to fire before the enemy can react. But as you close to firing range, the Thunderbolt pilot sees you, glances back or receives warning from wingman, or simply senses the threat through the constant scanning that experienced pilots develop. He rolls inverted and pulls through into a split S, diving away with the speed that only Thunderbolt's weight and power can generate, accelerating so quickly that your attempt to follow puts you in overspeed condition where controls become heavy and buffeting indicates you are approaching structural limits. You abandon the pursuit, pull back to safe speed, climb to regain altitude while scanning for threats. The engagement has lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though time distortion makes it feel simultaneously longer and shorter, makes individual moments stretch, while the overall sequence compresses into blur of action and reaction and survival instinct overriding conscious thought. Your ammunition counter shows you have fired perhaps 200 rounds, scored no confirmed hits, damaged no enemy aircraft. Around you, the sky is emptying as combatants separate, as German fighters low on fuel or ammunition break off and return to base, as American escorts reform around the bomber stream and continue toward their target. You land at your base near Munich, taxi to dispersal, shut down the engine and sit in the cockpit for a moment, processing what just happened, what you learned, what it means that engaging the Thunderbolts produced no results despite tactical opportunities that should have yielded kills earlier in the war, when German fighters had qualitative superiority that compensated for numerical disadvantage. The ground crew chief approaches, asks if you scored any kills, sees your expression, and understands without words that the answer is no, that another mission has produced only survival rather than victory.
The debriefing is subdued. All 12 pilots who returned from the mission acknowledging the same frustrating reality. The Thunderbolts are nearly impossible to shoot down with the tactics that worked against earlier Allied fighters. The combination of armor and structural strength and sheer size creating resilience that absorbs damage German guns can deliver without resulting in catastrophic failures that bring the aircraft down. Your squadron leader reports that one Thunderbolt was observed trailing smoke and descending, possibly a kill, though it was not confirmed by witnessing crash or pilot bailout, possibly just another damaged P-47 that will make it back to England and be repaired and return to combat within days, while the pilot walks away from landing without injury. They are built like tanks, one pilot says, the observation stating what everyone already knows, but which still feels worth articulating, because the psychological impact of fighting aircraft that refuse to die when hit is cumulative, demoralizing, creates sense of futility that undermines the aggressive tactics that characterized Luftwaffe operations earlier in the war. I put 30 rounds into one today, saw strikes on the engine and fuselage, and it just kept flying, kept fighting. The pilot did not even attempt to disengage. He simply absorbed the hits and returned fire. The squadron leader nods, acknowledging the problem without offering solutions, because no easy solutions exist. The Luftwaffe in 1944 is losing the air war not through lack of pilot skill or tactical doctrine, but through simple material inferiority, through the reality that American industry is producing fighters faster than German industry can replace losses, that American pilot training is producing experienced aviators, while German training has been compressed to minimum necessary to keep pilots alive for first few missions, that the strategic situation has deteriorated to point where tactical excellence cannot compensate for overwhelming disadvantage in numbers and resources. Focus on the bombers, the squadron leader repeats, the directive becoming mantra, becoming the only viable strategy in an environment where engaging escorts wastes ammunition and fuel and pilot lives without significantly impacting the bomber streams that continue reaching German cities and factories, regardless of how many fighters are shot down. The Thunderbolts want you to fight them. That is why they are here, to draw us into combat that protects the bombers. If we engage the escorts, we accomplish their mission for them. If we ignore the escorts and attack the bombers, at least we force them to defend rather than hunt. But ignoring the escorts is nearly impossible when they aggressively seek engagement, when Thunderbolt pilots use their speed and altitude to position for attacks on German fighters attempting to reach bomber formations, when the P-47's 8 machine guns create a barrier of fire that German fighters must penetrate to reach their targets. The tactical dynamic has fundamentally shifted from early war conditions, when early war fighters could choose engagements and withdraw at will, to current situation where every approach to bomber formations means running a gauntlet of escort fighters whose advantages in firepower and durability make each encounter costly, even when German pilots survive. You return to your quarters, write letter to your family that you know will be censored, that cannot mention losses or tactical difficulties, or the general sense that the Luftwaffe is losing control of German airspace, that must maintain optimistic tone about the war's progress, even though everyone understands the reality is desperate. The letters you receive from home describe the bombing raids, the destruction of cities, the civilian casualties that are mounting as Allied air campaign intensifies. Your younger brother mentions seeing American fighters strafing trains and vehicles, describes the fear of hearing aircraft engines and knowing that ground targets are increasingly vulnerable to air attack, that the Thunderbolts and Mustangs are not just escorting bombers, but are hunting for targets of opportunity on the return flights. This ground attack role has become secondary mission for Thunderbolt squadrons, exploiting the aircraft's heavy armament and structural strength to attack German transportation and infrastructure at low altitude where anti-aircraft fire is intense and lighter fighters would be extremely vulnerable. The P-47's radial engine, with its air-cooled cylinders arranged in a circle around the crankshaft, can absorb significant battle damage and continue running, because destroying it requires hitting multiple cylinders rather than penetrating single block like the inline engines used in most fighters. The armor protecting the cockpit and oil systems make pilot survivability high even when the aircraft takes hits from ground fire. The result is that Thunderbolt pilots can attack defended targets with acceptable loss rates, can strafe airfields and rail yards and convoys while surviving the kind of damage that would bring down other aircraft. Your squadron receives intelligence report about Thunderbolt tactics and capabilities, a document compiled from pilot debriefings, an examination of crashed American aircraft, an interrogation of captured pilots. The report confirms what you have learned through experience. The P-47 is nearly invulnerable to light and medium caliber weapons, requires concentrated fire from multiple fighters or hits from heavy cannon to reliably bring down, can survive mid-air collisions that would destroy both aircraft in engagements with lighter fighters. The document includes technical specifications that explain the aircraft's performance, the massive engine producing 2,535 horsepower with water injection, the 8.5 caliber guns carrying 425 rounds per gun for a total of 3,400 rounds of ammunition, the maximum speed of 433 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, the service ceiling of 43,000 feet that exceeds what most German fighters can reach.
But the most significant section of the report discusses pilot quality. The American pilots flying Thunderbolts in 1944 are experienced, well-trained, disciplined in applying tactics that exploit their aircraft's strengths. They do not make the mistakes that characterized early American operations when pilots tried to dogfight and often died because they were using their aircraft incorrectly. They have learned, they have adapted, they have developed tactical doctrine that makes the P-47 devastating despite its limitations, that turns its weight and firepower and durability into advantages that overwhelm the maneuverability and rate of climb that German fighters retain. We must accept new reality, the intelligence report concludes. The Thunderbolt is a formidable opponent that cannot be defeated through conventional fighter tactics. Engaging them in combat should be avoided when possible. When engagement is unavoidable, attacks must be made from positions of significant advantage, preferably from high altitude with speed advantage that allows single firing pass followed by immediate disengagement. Extended combat with Thunderbolts will result in casualties we cannot afford. The advice is sound, but difficult to implement when Thunderbolts actively seek engagement, when they use altitude and tactical patience to force German fighters into disadvantageous positions, when avoiding them means accepting that the bombers they escort will reach their targets unopposed. The missions continue through the spring of 1944, each sortie following the same brutal pattern. Scramble to altitude, attempt to penetrate escort screen, attack bombers if opportunity exists, survive the engagement with American fighters who are increasingly confident and aggressive as they recognize their material and tactical superiority. You watch your squadron's strength diminish, not through dramatic losses in single engagements, but through steady attrition, where one or two pilots fail to return from each mission, where replacement pilots arrive with inadequate training and survive perhaps 3 or 4 sorties before they too are killed, where the experienced core of the squadron shrinks until veterans like you with 20 confirmed kills are considered irreplaceable assets who should be grounded before accumulated combat stress or simple probability catches up. But the Luftwaffe cannot afford to ground experienced pilots, cannot create a reserve of veterans who can train replacements and pass on tactical knowledge, cannot implement the rotation policies that Allied air forces use to preserve their most skilled aviators. Every pilot who can fly, must continue flying until killed or wounded or captured, must accept that survival is temporary condition that will eventually be reversed through mechanical failure or tactical mistake or simple bad luck that places you in the wrong position when a Thunderbolt's guns track across the sky and 8 streams of 5.0 caliber rounds converge on your aircraft. May 8, 1944.
Another intercept mission, another bomber stream approaching Munich, another formation of escorts that includes the blocky silhouettes of Thunderbolts mixed with the sleeker Mustangs. Your squadron climbs to 28,000 feet, positioning above and ahead of the bomber formation, preparing to dive through the escorts in a coordinated attack that might allow some fighters to reach the B-17s and B-24s that are the actual targets. The tactic rarely works anymore. The American escorts have become too skilled at disrupting these attacks, too effective at forcing German fighters into defensive maneuvering that bleeds energy and creates vulnerability. But it is the only option available when refusing to engage means watching the bombers destroy German cities without resistance.
The missions continue through the spring of 1944, each sortie following the same brutal pattern. Scramble to altitude, attempt to penetrate escort screen, attack bombers if opportunity exists, survive the engagement with American fighters who are increasingly confident and aggressive as they recognize their material and tactical superiority. You watch your squadron's strength diminish, not through dramatic losses in single engagements, but through steady attrition, where one or two pilots fail to return from each mission, where replacement pilots arrive with inadequate training and survive perhaps 3 or 4 sorties before they too are killed, where the experienced core of the squadron shrinks until veterans like you, with 20 confirmed kills, are considered irreplaceable assets who should be grounded before accumulated combat stress or simple probability catches up. But the Luftwaffe cannot afford to ground experienced pilots, cannot create reserve of veterans who can train replacements and pass on tactical knowledge, cannot implement the rotation policies that Allied air forces use to preserve their most skilled aviators. Every pilot who can fly, must continue flying until killed or wounded or captured, must accept that survival is temporary condition that will eventually be reversed through mechanical failure or tactical mistake or simple bad luck that places you in wrong position when Thunderbolt's guns track across the sky and 8 streams of .50 caliber rounds converge on your aircraft. May 8th, 1944. Another intercept mission, another bomber stream approaching Munich, another formation of escorts that includes the blocky silhouettes of Thunderbolts mixed with the sleeker Mustangs. Your squadron climbs to 28,000 feet, positioning above and ahead of the bomber formation, preparing to dive through the escorts in a coordinated attack that might allow some fighters to reach the B-17s and B-24s that are the actual targets. The tactic rarely works anymore. The American escorts have become too skilled at disrupting these attacks, too effective at forcing German fighters into defensive maneuvering that bleeds energy and creates vulnerability. But it is the only option available when refusing to engage means watching the bombers destroy German cities without resistance. You roll into the attack, pushing your Bf-109 into a steep dive that builds speed rapidly, that positions you above and behind the bomber formation, where anti-aircraft fire from the bombers is less effective, where you have seconds to line up a shot before the escorts react. But Thunderbolts are already turning to intercept, already diving from their patrol altitude with the speed their weight generates, already positioning to cut you off before you can reach the bombers. You see the lead Thunderbolt approaching, see the sun glinting off the massive propeller, see the gun ports in the wings that house the 8 machine guns. The American pilot opens fire at a range you consider excessive, at distance where your own guns would be ineffective, where the probability of hits is low.
But he is not trying to hit you at this range. He is creating barrier of tracers that you must fly through to continue the attack, creating psychological pressure that forces decision about whether reaching the bombers is worth flying through that stream of .50 caliber rounds. You commit to the attack, maintaining your dive, accepting the risk, because turning away means mission failure, means the bombers continue unopposed. The rounds pass close enough to hear, close enough that the turbulence from near misses rocks your aircraft, close enough that you understand viscerally why Thunderbolt pilots are willing to open fire at what seems like wasteful range. The sheer volume of fire they can deliver, the 3,400 rounds they carry, allows them to saturate airspace and create zones of denial that are difficult to penetrate, regardless of German pilot determination. But you penetrate anyway, emerge from the tracer stream without taking hits, position behind a B-17, and fire a 3-second burst that produces strikes on the bomber's tail section and right wing. The B-17 staggers, loses position in formation, begins descending with smoke trailing from the damaged engine. You do not have time to confirm the kill because thunderbolts are converging from multiple directions, because your brief attack on the bomber has cost you the energy advantage you need to escape, because now you are the target rather than the hunter. You brake hard right, pulling maximum G, feeling the gray tunnel vision that indicates you are approaching G-induced loss of consciousness, maintaining the turn because the alternative is presenting stable target for the Thunderbolt guns. Something hits your aircraft with the sound of hammer striking sheet metal, multiple somethings. The BF-109 shudders, controls become mushy, and you know without looking that you have taken damage, that .50 caliber rounds have penetrated somewhere critical, that the aircraft is degrading toward unflyable condition. You push the nose down, trading altitude for speed, diving away from the engagement while checking instruments to assess the damage. Oil pressure dropping, coolant temperature rising. The engine has been hit, is failing, will seize within minutes if you cannot nurse it long enough to reach friendly territory. The thunderbolt that hit you is not pursuing. You see it in your mirrors, climbing away to rejoin the bomber escort, demonstrating the tactical discipline that characterizes American fighter operations. The pilot could chase you, could attempt to confirm the kill by following your damaged aircraft down and finishing you with another burst, but that would take him away from the bomber formation, would violate the primary mission of protecting the bombers, would risk his own aircraft in low-altitude pursuit where German anti-aircraft positions might engage. So he lets you go, accepts the probable kill without confirmation, returns to his assigned duty. You coax the failing engine through descent toward base near Munich, managing the throttle and mixture to minimize stress on damaged systems, watching the temperature gauge climb toward redline, listening to the rough running that indicates cylinders are failing, accepting that you will be fortunate to reach the airfield before the engine destroys itself completely. The landing is ugly, engine quitting on final approach, forcing you to glide the final 1,000 feet without power, touching down hard and fast because you cannot risk the gentle approach that might leave you short of the runway. The aircraft rolls to a stop, and you sit in the cockpit breathing heavily, hands shaking with adrenaline aftermath, understanding that you just survived an encounter that could easily have been fatal, that the Thunderbolt pilot's accurate fire damaged your aircraft severely, but missed you personally through luck or wind deflection or the simple chaos of high-speed aerial combat where perfect accuracy is impossible, even with superior armament.
The ground crew examines your aircraft and counts 47 holes, ranging from small punctures where single rounds passed through non-critical areas
to large tears where multiple hits struck concentrated location. 7.50 caliber rounds hit the engine, destroying cylinders and puncturing the oil system and creating the failure that forced your emergency landing. The crew chief shakes his head, making the assessment you already know. The aircraft is repairable, but will require weeks of work, requires replacement engine and extensive structural repairs, will consume resources that are increasingly scarce as German production struggles to replace combat losses and maintain readiness. You are grounded while your aircraft is repaired, assigned to training duties where you attempt to teach replacement pilots the lessons you have learned through 2 years of combat experience, trying to compress knowledge that took hundreds of hours to acquire into abbreviated instruction that gives them marginally better chance of surviving their first encounters with American fighters. The students are young, 17 and 18 years old, products of accelerated training program that graduates them with 50 hours of flight time compared to the 200 hours you received, that sends them into combat without adequate preparation because the alternative is having no pilots at all, is watching the bomber streams continue unopposed because there are no fighters to intercept them. You tell them about the Thunderbolt, about its weight and armor and firepower, about the tactics that might work, attacking from altitude with speed advantage, firing in single pass and disengaging immediately, never attempting to turn fight or pursue into dives where the P-47's weight becomes advantage rather than limitation, about the psychology of fighting aircraft that refuses to die when hit, that absorbs damage and continues fighting, that creates sense of futility when you score what should be killing hits and watch the enemy fly away damaged but operational. Respect the Jug, you tell them, using the German nickname that has become universal among Luftwaffe pilots. It looks clumsy. It looks like it should be easy target, but it is the most dangerous aircraft you will face because it combines firepower that can destroy you instantly with durability that makes it nearly impossible to destroy. American pilots know this. They have learned to use the aircraft correctly. They will not dogfight with you. They will not make mistakes that create opportunities. They will attack from a position of advantage, fire their 8 machine guns, and disengage before you can respond. Your only chance is to avoid engagement entirely, to focus on bombers and ignore escorts, to survive rather than trying to win. The students nod, making notes, trying to absorb tactical wisdom that contradicts everything they have been taught about fighter combat being decided by pilot skill and aircraft maneuverability, about German fighters being superior to Allied aircraft because they turn tighter and climb faster. The reality in 1944 is that these advantages no longer matter, have been negated by American tactical evolution and overwhelming numerical superiority, and the simple fact that Thunderbolts and Mustangs can escort bombers all the way to targets deep in Germany, while German fighters must operate near their fuel limits, must conserve ammunition, and avoid extended engagements that leave them vulnerable when reserves run low. Your repaired Bf-109 returns to service in June 1944, and you resume combat operations knowing that each mission might be your last, that probability and attrition eventually catch every pilot, regardless of skill or experience, that survival this long has been combination of competence and luck, and the luck component becomes more important as the war's intensity increases. The missions blur together, scrambles and intercepts, and brief violent encounters with American fighters, followed by returns to base where you count the aircraft that did not return, where you watch replacement pilots arrive and wonder how many sorties they will survive. August 1944. You are assigned to escort duty for one of the new Me-262 jet fighters that represent Germany's last hope for technological advantage, for capability that might offset American numerical superiority through sheer performance improvement. The mission is to protect the jet during takeoff and landing, when it's most vulnerable, when its engines are spooling up or down, and its speed advantage is neutralized by the requirements of getting airborne or returning to Earth. You fly top cover while the Me-262 takes off, watching it accelerate with the incredible speed that only jet propulsion provides, watching it climb away toward intercept altitude, where it will attack bomber formations with the closing speed and firepower that make it nearly impossible for escorts to protect their charges. But thunderbolts are waiting near the airfield, having learned that the best time to attack jets is during takeoff or landing, when they cannot use their speed advantage, when they are as vulnerable as any conventional aircraft. You see the thunderbolts diving toward the climbing Me-262, see them positioning for attack, and you turn to intercept, knowing this will be suicide mission, knowing that engaging 4 thunderbolts alone means almost certain death, but that the alternative is allowing them to destroy the jet before it can reach combat altitude. You fire at the lead thunderbolt, scoring hits on the wing and fuselage, watching the rounds strike home, but seeing no significant effect, watching the American pilot maintain his attack profile despite the damage. His wingman breaks toward you, 8 guns firing, and you pull into desperate evasive turn that bleeds speed and energy and creates vulnerability you cannot afford. More rounds hit your aircraft. The Bf-109 shudders, controls go slack, and you know with absolute certainty that this is the end, that you have finally encountered the combination of circumstances that no skill can overcome, that the Thunderbolt's firepower has damaged your aircraft beyond your ability to control it.
You bail out at 8,000 feet, tumbling through the air before deploying the parachute, descending slowly while watching your aircraft spiral toward the ground, trailing smoke and flame. The thunderbolts do not strafe you. Observe the protocols about not firing on parachuting pilots. Circle once and then return to their patrol. You land in a field 20 kilometers from your base, are picked up by German troops and returned to your squadron, where the commander informs you that you are being permanently grounded, that 2 years of combat and 23 confirmed kills have earned you the privilege of surviving the war's final months in training role, rather than continuing to fly missions that will inevitably result in your death. You accept the grounding with relief and guilt. Relief at survival, guilt at leaving your squadron mates to face the Thunderbolts and Mustangs without your experience, without the tactical knowledge that took years to develop and which dies with every veteran pilot who is killed before he can pass it on. The war continues without you, continues for 9 more months until Germany surrenders in May 1945. until the Luftwaffe ceases to exist and the Thunderbolts and Mustangs are reassigned to occupation duties or returned to the United States or scrapped because they are no longer needed. You survive to see the accounting, to learn that Republic Aviation built 15,686 Thunderbolts during the war, that they flew 546,000 combat sorties, that they destroyed 11,874 enemy aircraft and 9,000 locomotives and 86,000 railroad cars and 86,000 trucks, that they achieved air-to-air kill ratio that made them one of the most effective fighters of the war, despite their limitations in maneuverability and rate of climb. You survive to understand that the Jug was dangerous not because it was elegant or nimble or beautiful, but because it was practical, durable, built to a design philosophy that prioritized bringing pilots home over achieving aesthetic ideals, that valued firepower and armor over lightweight and tight turning radius. The Thunderbolt endures in memory not as the most graceful fighter, but as the most practical, not as the aircraft that turned best, but as the one that worked best, that fulfilled its mission of protecting bombers and ground-attacking German infrastructure and bringing pilots home despite damage that would have destroyed lighter, more elegant designs. Sometimes the tank wins. Remember that.